Hey, how's it going, and welcome to another video. Alright, so Shin Megami Tensei 5 has been out for a little while now, and I figured now would be a good time to chat about my favorite dumb activity, figuring out how powerful characters are. It's a wonderful activity enjoyed by both small children and grown-ass men with nothing better to do, and SMT characters are especially, fun to talk about. So let's discuss the protagonist from Shin Megami Tensei 5. This video does contain spoilers for the entire game, so I would recommend finishing it before watching. So before we get into the character himself, it's important to understand what a Nahobino is, and the lore implications that it has for the game and the series. Nahobino are essentially gods in their truest state, and as explained by Koshimizu, in the distant past, all gods existed as Nahobino, and had both life and a component known as knowledge. When God took control of the universe, he ordered all other gods be stripped of their knowledge, reducing them to lesser forms as demons. God then placed this knowledge in a tree within the Garden of Eden for safekeeping. The fallen angel Lucifer then tempted humanity's progenitors into eating the fruit from the tree, and with it they attained the forbidden knowledge. This was then passed down through humanity, with certain humans receiving certain gods' individual knowledge. This wasn't much of an issue until God himself was killed by Lucifer, meaning his divine order was no longer in place, and demons could once again attain their true form as Nahobino. The main character is one such Nahobino. In other words, he is a true god who possesses both life and knowledge. In the story, he was the first to awaken to his form as a Nahobino, being born from a fusion of himself and the proto-fiend Aogami. We don't currently have an official name for this character, so to avoid confusion, I will be referring to him as the protagonist. Before we dive too deep into story stuff, I wanted to quickly cover why from a gameplay perspective the protagonist is really bonkers and very dumb. I talked about this pretty extensively in my demi-fiend versus 1000 Morganas video, but SMT protagonists are kind of just a nightmare to put into versus battles because of how customizable they are. The protagonist is absolutely like this, with a completely customizable moveset and abilities that allow him to just bypass conventional defense. On the defensive end of things, you can rig him up to be immune to physical attacks as well as various elements, or just allow him to completely absorb or reflect them back. This naturally leads to a lot of arguments about what can and can't get past their innate defenses, and in all honesty is probably the most obnoxious thing about them. You end up having to get into these really weird hokey discussions about the nature of nullifying attacks, as well as rules about attacks from other series, and it's just this horrible nightmare. But the fun doesn't stop there, as he can be given piercing moves, which just straight up ignore resistances and immunity to certain attack types. So he really does get the best of both worlds offensively and defensively. With the combination of these traits, you can kind of just bullshit your way into winning with how many options are given. For example, let's say we do a battle that's protagonist versus some other character that uses fire. Well, guess what? The protagonist has immunity to fire. GG. Try to punch him in the face? Well, guess what? He's immune to physical. It doesn't work. Oh, does the enemy resist most forms of attack? Well, guess what? The protagonist has almighty moves and piercing attacks. It's really goofy, but that's kind of just how they are. It usually takes hacks or just really busted abilities to take down a lot of SMT protagonists, since fights against more conventional characters will usually go in their favor through the law of because I said so. And like I said, it usually ends up devolving into a discussion about the rules of attacks and resistances and the nature of individual series and how abilities and power works, and it's just very fun. The protagonist also has a slew of unique abilities, one of them being his trademark beam sword that he can summon at a moment's notice. This is his main method of physical attack, and he uses it very frequently throughout the game, but he also has access to unique elemental moves like Ruinous Thunder, Thalassic Calamity, and Profaned Land. Some of his more deadly techniques include Wrath Tempest and Murakumo, and of course he has access to almost every technique in the game through essences, including the previously mentioned piercing magic that bypasses resistances. He also has a slew of healing magic, buffing skills to make him faster, more powerful, more defensive, as well as abilities that inflict status ailments. So ability-wise, he's pretty much just completely stacked, being very adept with a blade and having a huge arsenal of magical abilities. He also sports some very impressive feats and victories throughout the game, such as slaying the Hydra, which had been terrorizing the area around Tokyo Tower, and surviving a battle against the mother goddess Nuwa, who is one of the most viable contenders for the throne of creation. Later on in the story, he defeats the demons Surt, Ishtar, and Ariog the Demon King, who are seemingly giving the entire combined might of Bethel a difficult time. He then proceeds to take down all of Bethel's former commanders such as Abdiel, Odin, Zeus, and Vasuki, most of whom were the most powerful representatives of their respective nations. At the end of the game, he is capable of taking down the other Nahobino, those being some combination of Tsukiyomi, Nuwa, and Abdiel, just depending on which route you go with. These are all characters individually worthy of taking up the throne, and as Nahobino are a step above everything else that exists in the game, maintaining forms as true gods. However, the most interesting entity the protagonist is able to defeat is Shiva, who just straight up says he's going to destroy the universe using Rudra Astra. This is a very solid example of a character having a stated level of power. Homie just says he's gonna blow up the universe, and Aogami doesn't say anything to dispute it. The protagonist is then able to defeat Shiva in battle, which logically means that he has a similar amount of Magatsuhi and power. In other words, the protagonist was able to definitively defeat a being who is about to just blow up the universe. Meaning the protagonist could theoretically also destroy the physical universe, as long as he was given enough time to gather Magatsuhi. However, shit gets absolutely bonkers for the character when you consider the implications of the ending and the final battle, and why I ultimately think the protagonist from SMT5 is ultra omega top tier and arguably the strongest SMT protagonist. The final boss of the game is Lucifer, and keep in mind, the Lucifer from the beginning of the game definitively killed God himself. The same God who created the physical universe, which consists of seemingly infinite realities. And in Nocturne, Kagetsuchi, who is a mere aspect of God, was capable of universal creation and destruction. Being able to kill God is just about the highest benchmark you can realistically achieve, with only a handful of entities and characters from across the series ever truly accomplishing it. This guy was slain by Lucifer, and this isn't even the Lucifer the protagonist fights. The protagonist fights Lucifer, who had obtained God's knowledge, and became a being, quote, more than he could have possibly imagined. This makes him Lucifer, who is already stronger than God, plus God, which turned him into a Nahobino. This arguably makes this incarnation of Lucifer the most powerful entity that we've seen in the series, with the exception of Steven and the Axiom, since he killed God and then became even stronger. This incarnation of Lucifer is then defeated by the protagonist, who takes his place at the Empyrean and recreates existence according to his own will. This makes him pretty similar to Nanashi, the protagonist from SMT4 Apocalypse, who in the Massacre route likewise defeated God and was able to seize the creator's throne, and then supplanted himself as the new god and recreated the world according to his wishes. Another metric we can use to measure the protagonist is his fight against the demi-fiend. It's debatable whether or not this is canon since it's optional DLC, but I figured it was worth mentioning anyways. Again, check out the Demi-Fiend versus 1000 Morgana video to get the rundown on him, but the Demi-Fiend's greatest feats include defeating Kagetsuchi and his game's incarnation of Lucifer. Kagetsuchi being an aspect of God capable of recreating the entire universe on a whim, and assuming you go true demon ending, Kagetsuchi is actually killed by the Demi-Fiend. He is also capable of defeating Lucifer as a final test of his strength, and Lucifer believes his newfound demonic power will be enough to defeat God himself, although the actual result of the battle is left unanswered. The protagonist and Demi-Fiend are presented as being relative equals in the fight, meaning he should be at least capable of defeating the same adversaries that the Demi-Fiend did. It also seems likely that this is Demi-Fiend from the True Demon ending, since he has the Pixie with him and the other fiends make mention of a destroyed world that they come from, and they all speak very highly of the Demi-Fiend and his power. Whether you consider the two characters to be equals or you think the protagonist is stronger, either way it shows the universe-ending Demi-Fiend at least rivals the protagonist, which just ends up giving some more credit to his name. So to wrap things up, I really think the protagonist of SMT5 has kind of been blessed. This character is honestly far stronger than I ever could have anticipated. Obviously, there was really no way to tell before the game came out, but I was expecting him to be a little bit more low-key and in line with some other protagonists from the series. 4 Apocalypse went pretty hard with the characters fighting and defeating God, so I assumed they would kind of tone it down in 5, but instead, they doubled down and had the final boss be arguably the most dangerous enemy in the series other than Steven. Obviously, there's the typical broken gameplay nature SMT characters tend to have. You can just customize the character to your heart's content, make him immune to just whatever the fuck you want, make him use whatever attacks you want. This makes it so easy for him to like counterpick other characters, but unlike a lot of other SMT protagonists who have pretty impressive feats, but are otherwise just dudes, the protagonist being a Nahobino makes him a very special entity. He is a living, breathing, true deity. And probably the best thing about him, he has actual feats backing him up. Shiva in particular puts him at a universal level, and then he manages to defeat Lucifer in his own Nahobino form, which makes him single-handedly god level without any tricks or gimmicks or roundabout methods. He then seizes the throne and is able to restructure the universe as he wishes, giving him abstract universe recreation abilities beyond just fighting power. And as far as S&T is concerned, you really don't get any better than that, with only the insane Freakazoid Steven, who has a beyond godly level of understanding about existence, possibly being a threat. He is a very dumb, completely bonkers, insane character. I would say he's at the minimum top 3 or so strongest main characters, and probably number 1. I'm genuinely surprised Atlas made the character this cracked. Yeah, he's busted. But yeah, that has been the video. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time.